Welcome back to the World Extreme Medicine podcast with myself, Wayne Walker. In this conversation, I'm talking with Wayne Auton around his journey through the military, joining the Royal Marine Commandos, specialising as a sniper within the military, then progressing and transitioning through into pre-hospital care as a paramedic, then in as a CCP, and then finally his recent transition to mountaineering and alpinism in Chamonix in the French Alps. Wayne has also published a blog around his experience with high-performing teams. As a common concept of high-performing teams, it's come out through his transition through both the military, pre-hospital care, and into mountaineering. And so what we wanted to do today is really tap into his experience and this concept of high-performing teams within these three domains. So welcome to the podcast, Wayne.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having us. It's always a pleasure.
It's great, mate, to have you back. You're not a stranger to the World Extreme Medicine podcast, nor to the live sessions, so it's great to have you back.
Yeah, thanks.
So what we're going to do within the session is really just, like I said before, tap into some of Wayne's military perspectives and experience around his role as a sniper and some of the nuances and details there. We're also going to look at some of the fundamentals around Wayne's involvement within the Royal Marine Commandos in this idea of high-performing teams within the unit. We're also going to look at his transition and key elements he brought through from his military into pre-hospital care. Then we're going to look at the fundamentals of critical care around high-performing teams. And then we're going to also look at the transition into the French Alps and how climbing and again being part of a high-performing team has been part of Wayne's experience. So Wayne, if I could just get you initially, if possible, to speak to your route into the Royal Marine Commandos and your path through to becoming a sniper.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my routine is probably very similar to a lot of guys and girls that join the military. Certainly, I decided I was going to join the military from a young age, so I was very disengaged through school. I think the only kind of good GCSE results and stuff was probably PE and, believe it or not, English. So I was disengaged quite a bit with school. I then left school, had a few part-time or kind of ad hoc jobs that I just walked away from, wasn't that interested, and thought, right, this is where I need to be. My kind of careers advisor at the time, I got a letter through the post saying, right, I went in for an interview. These are the professions that we recommend. One was a gardener, the other one was a Royal Marines Commando. So I chose the Royal Marines Commando route. And that's the kind of route I went. And it was quite strange because the day I was going to join up, I was just stepping out the door and I was going to join the parachute regiment, believe it or not. And I got this letter through and I'd never really heard of the Royal Marines. So I thought, right, I'll give these guys a shot. So careers office, I went, had to do so many pull-ups in front of them. And then they said, right, fill this paperwork in. And then a few weeks later, I got an interview or an appointment, to do the RMC, which is the Potential Royal Marines course, which is a 3-day kind of physical course, which lets me look at the Marines and if it's what I want to do, but it also lets the Marines look at the kind of the recruits or the potential recruits. So I went down there, got thrashed for 3 days, and then passed it, and then I got offered my kind of training 30 weeks down at Limpson it was at the time, where you go down, you're living in a massive block and you transition from being a civilian into kind of basic soldier, into a Royal Marine, and then into your commando training. So they'll teach you everything down there from, so obviously you get there, you get your hair cut. It's very much like what you see on the TV, and a lot of screaming and shouting initially when you get off the train. They've got their own train platform down there. You go up to your block, it's like, could be anything from 30 to 60 blokes in this big dormitory. You just learn to live together. They teach you how to wash yourself. They just teach you how to administrate yourself, basic drill, things like that, ironing, get everyone on a kind of similar level, similar playing field, and then progress you through like that. And it is just kind of to break you down, get that civilian side out of you, and then make you into this Royal Marine that comes out the other end of it.
So Wayne, as you're sort of placed into different environments, because like you said, it's a real transition from civilian life to military life. And you're starting to be placed into maybe training environments and then into real environments. Did you have teaching or training around environment scanning in a dynamic environment, just that situation awareness, or is it something you just develop through the progression of your career in the military?
Yeah, it's a strange one. Obviously, it's taught from kind of day one in training, that whole situational awareness, and then throughout your training, you're kind of picking up the skills. You're scanning the ground. You're looking for what's normal, what is not normal. Sorry. Yeah, so it is kind of like, it's a lot of, it's just not the right word, it's certainly experience where you start to look for things out of the ordinary, and you start noticing people here, there and everywhere, or you start noticing the ground around you that shouldn't be there. There's a bit of dew being wiped off that piece of grass, just little things like this. Is that vehicle parked there which it shouldn't be parked there? And there's a saying in the military, and it's that kind of absence of the normal, presence of the abnormal. So it's kind of a common analogy. You'll go into a marketplace type thing, it's busy all the time, and then one day it's quiet. Like, right, there's something not right here. And it gets your kind of spidey senses tingling. But I think a lot of it is experiential. It is learning. It's being aware of it, obviously, but then going into these situations and finding out, and it's just it's a huge thing within the Royal Marines that you kind of drilled into.
So just looking at, like you said, the basic training, and there's a real sense of discipline instilled within you. But as you're progressing through your military career and you're starting to maybe look at becoming a part of a high-performing team, there seems to be a real sense of sort of homogenous self-regulation or auto-regulation within the team. So the team starts to look after each other, that you've had the discipline instilled. So it's actually now a sense of almost homeostatic self-care within the team rather than imposed from the outside. Could you maybe speak to that, and indeed into your progression into a high-performing team within the sniper unit?
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually, because at the time you don't realise you're operating within a high-performing team. So all my time in the Royal Marines, I obviously had this sense of pride of what I was a member of and stuff like that, but I never really thought, I'm part of a high-performing team. So it's kind of it started from day one, and it started the fact that you look after yourselves. There's a lot of military history taken, so you become part of this organisation. You get this sense of self-pride, to be part of this massive history and reputation of the Royal Marines, and it starts to get kind of instilled to you quite early, and then you pass training, Royal Marines, hopefully, then you go to your fighting unit or your commando unit. And you're put into your little kind of sections, so you're in these little groups, and the bond is huge. You leave training, you've built this massive bond with the guys there. Then you're all separated. You have to join a fighting company, and then the bond that you form with these guys through training, just through that kind of sense of what everybody's been through already, just through passing training. Everyone's on a similar level as you. And it's kind of throughout your career, it's kind of instilled in that way. The way I loved it. I loved being a part of that fighting company and stuff. But I thought there's something else there, and I started to get overlooked a little bit for a few things. There's an analogy that I had lead boots on, like I wasn't going anywhere. Probably because I did enjoy a bit of socialising and what have you. But what happened then was I decided, right, I'm going to say yes to the next thing that comes through that door. Just one. It was really strange. And it was a massive gamble, because it could have been, right, who wants to be a chef? Who wants to be a clerk? Who wants to go away for this? Whatever. Then the troop sergeant come through and said, right, who wants to volunteer to do a sniper course or the sniper selection? And I was like, right, me, I'm doing it. So hands up. Got on the sniper selection, which was a week long in the unit, and it covered things like shooting, cam and concealment, kind of teamwork, observation stances, so looking for little things in the woods or in a field. You pass that, you then go on to your 11 weeks training as a sniper down at Livingston, which is quite a respected course. There was a lot of kind of external agencies came in to do this course forces from like the Dutch, places like that. And then that's 11 weeks where they're teaching you how to firstly shoot, just like at normal ranges, so between 100 and 300 meters, and then that gets progressively longer up to 1,000 meters. They learn you how to do cam and concealment, how to stalk, which is kind of sneak up on people, getting your map reading up to a really high standard. And it's kind of the pinnacle, and your soldiering skills have to be really on point for this. And this is where that kind of time in the fighting unit in 4-5 Commando kind of came through. It was like, right, I've learned my skill there, I've learned the trade, I know how to operate as a team member. I actually was a 2IC of a section back then. I've got all these skills, I now need to up the level, and I'm going to take it into this sniper environment. But like I say, at that time, I didn't really know I was part of a high-performing team. And it wasn't until maybe 5 years ago when someone asked us something about high-performing teams and how did it work within the Royal Marines, I then started thinking, hang on a minute. Yeah, we were drilling all the time, we were training all the time, we worked together, we knew each other's strengths, weaknesses, all this stuff that kind of forms this high-performing team mentality. But at the time, I didn't really appreciate it. I was just like a young lad, right, this is what I'm going to do. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. And just looking at some of the concepts of high-performing teams, continual commitment to improve. Did you have after-action reviews, or indeed even in training, just simple debrief to try and recollect incremental change, incremental improvement?
Yeah, so debriefing was a massive thing. So certainly any kind of training sessions or training scenarios, you would debrief. So if you'd done something called a section attack, you would debrief that, what went right, what went wrong, how to improve it. Things like what you call break contract drills, where you take fire from one side, then you have to get out of that situation. You then debrief that, how that worked. And then throughout your career, you're getting kind of like reports. So a yearly report, your troop sergeant, troop commander will write a report on how you're doing and grade you to certain levels. Yeah. So, and give you a little write up where you can improve what you're doing really well, how you can improve, and things like that.
So interviewing previous either special forces soldiers or military personnel, they do speak of this sense of community and brotherhood, that there's a real notion of looking after each other and this regulation of team and not just of self. It's actually team before self. Could you maybe speak to that actually and how strong that was? Because interestingly, from a few of the colleagues, they say they couldn't articulate it at the time, but it was what they missed from military was actually that sense of close community, and they couldn't maybe articulate or put their finger on it, but that's truly what it was.
Yeah, it is. It's very clever action. I don't know if the Marines do it on purpose or if it's just a byproduct. But like I say, at the start of training and throughout your training, you're getting a lot of military history, like history of the Marines. So they're building this big thing. I don't want to use the word cult, but you get really bought into this big team. You want to do well for the guys that have passed, like in the history there. You want to do well for your team, and you want to do well for yourself. So I was pretty bad at school. My discipline was awful. And everyone said, you'll never join the military because your discipline's really bad. But I thought, all right, I'll give it a shot. And it isn't that same type of discipline, because you have this respect for the person who's telling you what to do. They've obviously got experience, so you respect that experience. And you want to do well it sounds really bad, but you want to do well for your team and to look good for you. You want to be the best you can be. So that discipline and wanting to do well comes from that feeling of self-pride and pride within the Royal Marines. And because you're living together as a group of blokes or a group of men, you're living in each other's pockets. You see each other at their worst, at their best, when people are down, when they're happy. And it just forms this bond. And I think one of the biggest things for high-performing teams and kind of like forming these bonds is vulnerability. So if you've all been vulnerable at kind of a similar point, or you see other people's vulnerabilities, it kind of knocks down a bit of a wall and you become a lot closer. And I see that in what I do now. If we have horrific job or a really dodgy flight where you think, "Ooh, this is a bit risky," then when you come off, you just seem a bit closer to that person that you were with or the team you're with. And that's the same in the Corps. When you're in these awful conditions and positions, you have a little bit of a laugh, but you see the vulnerability, and that makes you even closer. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that forms these bonds, is that vulnerability.
So looking at your transition through to pre-hospital care, so maybe if you could just walk us through the final stages of your military career and what maybe prompted the move into pre-hospital care, and what you also carried through, because making decisions in an information light environment is ubiquitous. Looking at leadership within these environments is also ubiquitous and carried through. Could you just maybe walk us through the final stages of your military career and then the transition through and what you did carry through?
Yeah, so I was wondering whether I should. This was quite a hard one to get the grips of. Like, why did I leave? So I would like to say it's because I grew up, but I definitely didn't. People still ask us when I'm going to grow up, so it obviously wasn't that. But I left. So there was a bad year for the Corps in general. There was a lot of guys that I knew got killed and stuff like that. So that was maybe a factor. The second factor is I went and done Special Forces selection and failed it. So I then went back to do it again. And I walked through the gates of Senny Bridge to start it, got there, turned round and drove back to my unit and put my notice in, just like that, notice to leave. So it was kind of, I think they were the two factors. So I always wanted to get Special Forces. That was my dream as a kid. Those were the books that I read. That's what I wanted to do. But then just something wasn't there. I just turned around, right, that's me done. And it was absolutely as instant. It was as instant as I just about turn, go back, there's my notice, I want to leave. In 12 months' time. That's how it works. So I left. Did I have a plan? Not really. I thought it was going to be something interesting like the police or something like that. But also like the oil and gas industry at the time. And then my neighbour was quite high up in the ambulance service, and she said, "Why don't you become a paramedic?" And I didn't know a great deal about that. And I was like, right, okay, let's have a look into it. And I said, I don't have the education, because this was one of the first degree courses. And that person then gave us a wink and a nod and said, you do have the education. So got on the course and then kind of loved it from there. So I did like the medical side of the training. I enjoyed that. And then just kind of took it from there. Absolutely loved it. And then a couple of years later, I qualified as a paramedic after the degree course. What was the other question about the decision making type thing and how I brought that from the Corps to what I do now? It's really funny. So I do like working in shades of grey, and that's in the pre-hospital setting. That's where we work. It's never like a yes or no black and white situation. It's always just trying to find your feet, and that's kind of always the environment that I love working in. That's where I kind of thrive. But I think it's a lot to do with pre-planning. So you have to know your team, things like that, know what their strengths and weaknesses are. And then when you get to these big jobs, you need to just take a moment. Obviously, unless things are going wrong really quickly. So, for example, in the Marines, if you got shot at from the left-hand side, you go to an immediate action drill, and it was automatic. It had been drilled and drilled and drilled. That's just what you've done. Turn to the left, start firing, and then start getting out of there, or win whatever you have to do. But if you have the time, just take a step back, assess the scene, and try and take in that kind of what's happening in front of you, and then prioritize in your head, right, this needs doing, this needs doing, and then trying to get what is important first, get it done. But to aid with that as well, you need to kind of offload stuff. You need to delegate. So that's where the strength in the team comes in, knowing your team. So you can then delegate something and trust it to your team members. So, right, yeah, this needs done, this needs done. Right, I'm going to give it to you. Then I can think of other things. And it's mega important to kind of delegate. And yeah, that's kind of how I bring it from the Marines. I don't get too excited. I don't rush in. I don't run into jobs. I just take a step back, have a minute, a bit of self-talk. Right, this is what needs doing. Let's work it from there. But I certainly think that the team trust is huge, because it's no good you delegating to someone and then constantly thinking in the back of your mind, oh, are they doing that right? Are they doing that right? And then before you know it, you have to go over and check, which is taking up a bit more of your capacity.
So you transition into being a paramedic from the military, and then what excites you, or indeed just draws your attention to critical care? How did sort of the critical care piece start to sort of fit into place?
So I think the type of people that the Royal Marines attract are kind of people that want to do well, and they take pride, and they want to be the best, as kind of corny as that sounds. And that's how I perceived kind of critical care. So as a paramedic, you can do so much. You've got a set of skills that you can work towards. But I felt that I needed to offer my patients more, and I felt I had that ability to do that. So I knew, right, how do I offer these patients more? And the way to do that is to get to become part of a critical care team. And at the time, it's kind of, I thought, right, the critical care is the kind of pinnacle of pre-hospital care, certainly for paramedics. There's nowhere else that you can kind of go from there at the time. I don't know if that's true now as you get older and you've been doing it a while. I don't know if it still is the pinnacle or what, but that was my thought process. I want to do more for the patients. I want to be the best I can, and I want to learn more stuff, more kind of medical interventions, drug therapies, things like that. And that was the driving factor why I then went to critical care.
So looking at the critical care team, you joined a fantastic service up in Scotland, the EMRS service. So transitioning into that team, there's a couple of ubiquitous themes which definitely play a factor in high performing teams around training analogues. So train hard, fight easy, and also the utility of mastering the basics or mastering the essentials and just being really consistent over time at the essentials. Maybe if we could just look at training analogues first, could you maybe speak to the utility and the ubiquitous concept of training analogues, but from the Royal Marine Commandos, because there's lots of training that happens there, to your time as a CCP, critical care paramedic within EMRS, and training analogues there, because they seem to, and from my personal experience, really do equip you for these real life experiences because you have this analog of comparison.
Yeah, totally. Kind of training and drilling is really important, and everything that you do in that sense reduces that kind of pressure, that cognitive load on scene, because it's a familiarization, a situation that you've been in. So it's important to get like the skills that you can then make muscle memory up to scratch, so that you're not having to think about those little things when you're on scene or on ops in the Royal Marines or whatever. So, for example, we would constantly train break contact drills because we're quite a small team. We'd rehearse these quite a lot. So we're listening for verbal commands, which would then instinctively get you to perform a action. So if it's, again, contact left, everybody swings to the left, starts firing that direction, and then peeling away and getting out of that situation. Someone will be tasked with popping smoke. All this type of stuff, it just becomes instinctive, where everything is on your kit. And you take that into the pre-hospital setting or to the critical care team that I work in now. So we train every day. So we'll have scenarios every day. Based on real life kind of incidents. We'll go through our kit every single day, so we know where everything is, because the last thing you want to do on scene when someone says, can you pass me the jiggly saw, and you're like, what pouch is that in again? These little things can tip you over the edge when you're getting stressed out. We'll talk about case-based discussions, like best practice, how you can treat, how we can improve our practice. And then we'll look at, for example, we look at our badge cam footage. If we've done a big procedure, we'll look at our badge cam footage, and we'll look at the environment around us, our own situational awareness, how we're communicating to each other, the kind of colloquialisms that we use, how they can be misunderstood, the time it takes, because it's a massive time vacuum when you're doing these procedures. You lose all concept of time. And then we'll try and make these small marginal gains, like, all right, don't say that, you could say this, which would then make things a bit easier. But like I say, everything that we do is to reduce that cognitive load. And we sometimes do a bit of stress inoculation, but we're not too sure how effective that is, whether that is a good thing or a bad thing yet. There's evidence either way. So it depends who's running the scenario, but yeah, it's really hard because it's very artificial, the stress inoculation that you put in a training environment to what you actually faced on scene. So yeah, it is just drilling and drilling. That's kind of what we do at the moment with our critical care team, which is what I'd done previous as well.
So looking at learning the basics, or indeed the essentials of critical care, and indeed of being a sniper, could you maybe speak to how you confer that to others? So I think one of my revelations around critical care, it's not necessarily just your competence or indeed your skill. It's actually mentoring others on scene and around you to instill confidence within them and to mentor them in the moment, and not being scared to give people a second chance or third chance and optimize conditions for them. Could you maybe speak to that in your own practice, Wayne, and how you instill the essentials within other people, or indeed just advocate for them?
Yeah, I think as a critical care practitioner, everyone thinks you're this kind of you're going to fly in your red suit with loads of syringes and this, that, the other, and that isn't the majority of work. We're there to kind of support the teams on the ground, so the ambulance crews or whoever's at the fire service or police. And depending on the situation, we certainly want to give, if we can offer it, training's probably the wrong word, but advice, encouragement, like you say. So, for example, a new paramedic who hasn't put an IO in, an intraosseous needle, we'll kind of say, right, this isn't a mega time critical job. This patient needs an IO. Would you like to do it? And we'll facilitate that, and we'll kind of give them pointers. But equally, we're happy to kind of learn off the crews as well. But it's your soft skills. They're the biggest challenge, and it's how to deal with people, because I think as paramedics and ambulance crews, historically we're quite stubborn and we're like, oh, you're rocking up here telling me what to do. So it's how you kind of judge, how you work that. And you really have to get them on side and to say, look, we're not here to take over. We're here to work with you guys and offer those extra little interventions that we can do. And if we can get you involved, then we will, which will then develop your skills and stuff like that. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but it's been a massive learning thing for me, because people don't respond well. So when I first started as a paramedic, left the Marines, people didn't respond as well to my kind of, what I'm going to say, commands, because people then get the backup and they then just go and sit in the ambulance and go, all right, talk to me like that, are you? So it's about adjusting. And that is one of the hardest things of transitioning from a military world to a civilian world is, right, people aren't going to respond well to how you were spoken to or how you speak to people in the military. And it took us a little while to work that out. But I think I'm there now.
So, Wayne, can we just look at the transition through to living in Chamonix and what life looks like now? How did that come about? What have you learnt? And indeed, how is it going at the moment?
Yes, I feel really guilty when people ask us this, because I kind of moved out there to, what I would say, refill my cup. All right, so for the last 20 years, I've been, whether in the military or doing kind of paramedic stuff, winchman, CCP stuff. And I've just thought, right, I've had enough of this. I'm not getting excited anymore about these big jobs that normally I'll get a little bit of buzz of excitement, right? This will be really good. And I kind of lost that excitement and that thrill. Refill my cup. So I decided, right, I like mountaineering, I like climbing. Let's go and try and do this kind of full time, not as a profession, but take a bit of time out of work, concentrate on being out in the hills, in the mountains, learning this trade, because this is a massive challenge for me, and then see if I can kind of gradually push myself into more of an expedition medicine, combine the two, my kind of, I would say, passions. I am passionate about pre-hospital care and medicine and stuff, but also climbing and alpinism, and see if I can bring them together. So my life now is kind of climbing, skiing in season, and I'm also doing the diploma in mountain medicine because I'm quite time rich at the moment, which I haven't been previous, and that's kind of my life. So it's sitting in a cafe in Chamonix drinking espressos. So yeah, I do feel really bad about saying it when people say, "Oh, so what do you do out there?" I'm like, climbing and skiing, and that's it.
So Wayne, could you speak to what kind of leadership you were modelled within the military and what you carried through into pre-hospital care, and preferentially how you lead within pre-hospital care?
In the Marines, I was kind of expected to get there and just start being shouted at and bellowed at, and just this massive aggressive behaviour and stuff. But that isn't the case. There's very little. There's very little shouting. It's very much like, your parents when they say they're disappointed in you. They're not angry, but it always had the caveat at the end of, you can stand by, which means, right, you're in trouble. You've made a mistake. But there's very little shouting. I think there's a mixture of leadership kind of styles within the Marines, and it depends on the situation, it depends on the task, the objective, things like that, and that's very similar to what I do now. So the majority of the time, it was very much because I worked in quite a small team, and you're quite a senior Marine, and you've kind of demonstrated yourself, and you've got a bit of experience. There's definitely a bit of a democratic leadership style amongst the kind of guys. So the troop sergeant or whatever would kind of get input from everybody. Obviously, the final decision was his as to what happens. I thought that worked really well. And there's also, which is very similar to democratic, but like a team leadership style where it's very similar, but the kind of in the fact that it's all about the goal, the team, and then the individual. So the leader isn't so much focused on themselves. It's very much right, this is the team goal, this is what we need to do. And with this style of leadership, you kind of know the strengths and weaknesses of the team, and you'll allocate roles accordingly, and you kind of know who works well with who or whatever. So it wasn't that kind of it was very structured. It wasn't that kind of shouty leadership where you commanded what to do. And don't get us wrong, there were situations when that was needed, and still is. And the situations now in pre-hospital care, which I kind of wish I could use that style of leadership, but it doesn't really work. And I think there was maybe a bit of charismatic leadership in the Marines as well. So you'd look upon people who've got a lot of experience, who are kind of experience, you kind of role model type thing, and you kind of follow them due to, they've got good experiences. It's obviously a good decision, which there is a bias for this, which I can't remember. You'll probably know what the bias is, where you just follow someone because you think they know what they're doing due to their past experience. So there was an element of that. And I think it's very similar now to what I do. So our pre-hospital team is we try and flatten the hierarchy type thing. There is a democratic leadership style. And that changes. Like, I could lead a job and the doctor follows, or the doctor can lead the job and they follow, or we could be led by a fire service or a paramedic on the ground. It's a fluid situation. There's no one leadership style fits all. And that was evidenced through the Marines and also through what I do now.
Wayne, could you speak to the element of sort of high-performing teams you see within the EMRS and that you brought with it from the Royal Marine Commandos? It's just the similarities, any disparities as well. So any dissimilarities as well. But could you speak to the concept of high-performing teams within critical care?
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. The biggest thing, it's not a similarity, but it's quite hard to kind of judge the two teams, because in the Marines you're living together, working together, you're living the job itself. It's a way of life. Whereas when you leave, you become a paramedic. It's very much a job where you come in and you go home at night. A little bit different in my role, because we're kind of constantly on call with major incident calls and things like that. But you're not living the life as much as you were in the Marines, so you don't get that bond. And because we're quite a small team, we don't get to socialise as much as we would like to. The kind of comparisons or the similarities have come down to where you've got an overall goal. So the overall goal is the patient. So you're constantly working to make sure that you're providing the best care you can as a service to that patient. The other overall goal is the kind of team reputation and kind of the esprit de corps, the kind of doing well for the team as AMRS. We have a bit of a reputation and we want to maintain that. So is it similar to that? In terms of the training, constantly drilling, constantly getting slick, making those marginal gains everywhere we can. And also, like I was saying before, the vulnerability, there is a bit of vulnerability there, not so much because we're not as open as we would be with guys that you're living and breathing with, and but we do have that. We do show that vulnerability and that openness and honesty. If you make a mistake, you'll admit to it and say, I made this mistake, I think it was this reason, that reason. And then your partner will say, well, I think it may have been this. Let's look into it a bit further. It's that kind of open, honest culture. The training, the drilling, and the kind of reputation and that kind of vulnerability, I think, are the main things that you can bring from the Marines to what I do now.
So what elements of your practice, Wayne, did you have to upskill to sort of progress into critical care? Was there a dramatic change in your practice, or was it just more finessing the details?
I think it's important to know that, so I do have more advanced skills as a critical care paramedic, but I still do C, A, B, C, D, E approach to everything. So they're the basics, they're your fundamentals and your bread and butter. You need to be able to do those really well. And for various reasons, it's a structured approach. You don't miss things, but also it gives you that little bit of thinking space. It's a bit of a get out of jail free card. We're like, right, I'm struggling now. Hang on a minute, I'm just going to reassess while your brain is thinking of other things that it could be to try and get you out of that problem. In terms of upskilling, obviously it's the obvious medical skills and medical procedures. So I don't know, things like, let's go for some Gucci things, thoracostomies or thoracotomies, learning all these new skills, or putting someone on ventilating a patient or putting an arterial line in. These are all things that you don't do as a paramedic. So you do have like a training program to get the grips of these. Things like the in-hospital environment. So you could be at a roadside dealing with an RTC, which you're really comfortable with. And then an hour later or 2 hours later, you could be in a hospital somewhere, anaesthetising someone to bring them back to a major city. And that in-hospital phase is quite alien for paramedics. So that was a skill that I needed to kind of get on top of. Certainly the patient assessment. I was like, how do I assess a patient who's already in a hospital bed? But it is exactly the same. It's that C, A, B, C, D approach. Soft skills, like I've already mentioned, in terms of the communication, how I communicate to the crews and other services on scene. Making sure the doctors don't get into trouble and upset everybody. That is one of the biggest skills that you need as a critical care paramedic. And you say upskill, but you also have to downskill a little bit, certainly from the military to what I do now, in the fact that I need to be less pragmatic, which sounds really strange, but I've got in trouble quite a few times for being too pragmatic, and that could be certain people's view of risk is different to mine. So I can't set up a makeshift abseil and abseil down to a ghost to get to a patient type thing, or jump over a barrier to get someone, and I assess risk differently to other people, but you have to play that game. So yeah, I need to downskill my pragmatism. and learn to hold your tongue a bit more. Like I say, you can't speak to people the way you would. You can't get things done the same way as you would previous. But being a critical care paramedic is more about the decision making, when not to do a skill rather than to do a skill. That, you know, you get all these new skills that you want to use and stuff, but it's really important that you know when not to use them. And that's one of the biggest things. It sounds really good being a critical care paramedic, and it is, but it's not all doing all these interventions. It's about when not to, and the soft skills are probably 90% of what we do, just chatting and the decision making, you know. I think that's mega important, and they're the two big things that I have learned. Because it's so good, isn't it? All right, yeah, I can do that skill. It's dead easy. But then when it goes wrong, you're like, I probably shouldn't have done that skill.
So Wayne, let's look at where you are now, based in Chamonix, doing a certain number of shifts back in Scotland within the EMRS, but very much centred around alpinism, like you spoke to actually around taking a bit of time out for yourself and actually learning to maybe master two sets of skills, or indeed two domains of practice. What have you learned around alpinism that you didn't previously know before moving out there, Wayne?
Yeah, so I am all about the challenge, you know, and so alpinism and kind of mountaineering is a completely different challenge, and it's really hard, and I'm loving the challenge. I have learned that I'm pretty average at it, that I have a lot to learn. I think I have that conscious incompetence at the moment, or I know what I'm not good at. I don't know. I probably don't know what I'm not good at, so it's a strange one. In terms of alpinism or anything like that, and the kind of expedition medicine that I try and get into a bit more, it's very much, you can bring everything from the military, critical care, all into it. It's very much about the planning. It's who you climb with. It's having the trust in that person you climb with. It's having the trust in the equipment, know how to use it right. And again, just doing the basics really well in terms of making sure everything's tidy and knots are tidy. You haven't got pots and pans hanging off your rucksack, things like that. They're the kind of main things in it. The biggest thing, it's a serious environment, you know, like the high mountains are pretty serious environment. When I see these mountain guides and the mountain rescue of Chamonix and stuff, I'm just like, whoa, kind of take my hat off a bit. It's another level.
So yeah, we did a recent live webcast session with Pierre Muller actually, and talking about the PGHM service, so the Chamonix search and rescue team, and it was absolutely, to as you say, you know, high performing team, but doing the drills, you know, knowing your kit inside out, and good kit husbandry, good situational and spatial awareness. And knowing the perception of risk and how far to push it with risk. Could we maybe just come on to kit husbandry? Because I think that's maybe a big part of alpinism, but it also transcends critical care and also Royal Marine Commandos, sort of sniper high performing teams. Could you speak to the kit husbandry concept, knowing your kit inside out, and indeed taking care of your kit?
Yeah, I probably get quite a hard deal about this, because I wouldn't say I'm anal about it, but it has, if you look the part, you feel the part, and that's something that you always get taught. And if like a little thing can then turn into a big thing, especially in these environments. So I'm very much like, have everything kind of tidied away, don't have loads of stuff hanging off you. And especially on scene for kind of critical care jobs, I like the scene to be tidy. I like my little kit dump to be tidy. I don't like things blowing in the wind, shooting off all over, because it just makes things, people walk over it. You lose things when you need to get something quickly. So I am quite anal about kit husbandry, where it is, and taking care of it, because it helps you look after yourself, and this is part of your own professionalism. If you can look after yourself and your own kit, you can then look after others, in terms of patients or people in the hills, things like that. It's super important to know where your kit is so that you can get to it quickly. And we have a massive amount of kit, and we'll go through it each day pretty much, just checking it, knowing where everything is, so we know, right, can you get the arterial lines out? We'll know what pouch they're in. Can you get chest drain kit out. We know that's in the left lateral pouch of this bag, blah, blah, blah. And that helps, again, reducing that cognitive load, reducing that pressure, and not tipping you over the edge to that kind of frazzle stage where things are just a bit too much. And again, that can relate to in the mountains or in the cold environment, knowing where your second pair of gloves are, your warm kit. You need to get to it slick. And it's about having your kit sorted so that you open a glove away. If you lose a glove on a hillside, that's a little thing. But then over time, it develops into a big thing, to something extreme where you lose your fingers, So again, your kit husbandry is doing the basics well, just having it all squared away and not kind of opening something up and it's like a jack in the box and everything pops up everywhere, which actually initially our surgical procedures pack was like that. It was so full, you used to open it up and it just used to like spring open, like, oh God. And it just, when you're stressed out and you're looking at it going, oh, these are just a lot of white wrappers. Now I need to try and find, I don't know, the skin stapler in amongst all this stuff or the jiggly saw. I'm like, ugh. So yeah, it's about having your own admin sorted out and then your team's admin, and it's a bit of it goes up the chain, doesn't it?
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. When you're being shouted at for the finchettas in a thoracotomy kit and all you can see is a whole array of butchering kind of tools, and you can't find the scissors or indeed the jiggly saw or indeed everything you want. So you're right, it's having that second sense and instilling that unconscious competence whereby you're informing your unconscious brain so you know exactly where it is in your mind. Could you speak from that, Wayne? Could you speak to something interestingly you just said there about looking after your buddies? Because within mountaineering and alpinism, there seems to be a real theme around taking care of one another, which is carried through from very much military and indeed from pre-hospital care, from critical care, high-performing teams, and indeed homeostatic teams. Could you speak to that and your experience of that within Chamonix?
Yeah, it's quite. It's an interesting kind of concept, because in the Royal Marines, you're a self-contained organisation, so you've got everything. You don't have to rely on anybody else. That's very similar to what I do as a critical care paramedic. We are a little team, and we can do everything that we need to do within that team. Obviously, the transport side of it becomes an ambulance issue, and that goes down to climbing as well. So it's. To find climbing partners, it's quite difficult. The guys in Chamonix who are living in Chamonix have probably climbed with the same person for a long time. It's building that trust and knowing someone that can rely on you, and perform little things like a buddy check, like someone picking up, you've got a bit of frost nip on your cheek, or you've got a bit of frost nip on your nose, or something like that. It's finding these people, and once you find a good climbing partner, they're worth their weight in gold, because they've got your back. When you're pushing it a little bit, they're going to look after you. They've got you on that belay. They're not going to drop you. And similar, if you're moving together on a route, those guys are a good standard. Obviously, mistakes can happen, but you'll hopefully have their back. And it works both ways. And I think that's why I like climbing and mountaineering, because you form that. You're in a vulnerable position. You're forming that bond. You're really close by the time you come off these routes, and like I say, your climbing partner, the people you climb with a lot, are really good pals, because they know a lot about you and they know how you act and stuff like that.
So, Wayne, as we're coming to land on the conversation, could you maybe just speak to any take-home messages that unite the three domains? So anyone who's interested in either the military or indeed transitioning through to critical care practice, albeit nurse, paramedic, doctor, and is also interested in extreme environments, could you maybe speak to any take-home messages or pearls of wisdom that you've learned through being in all three domains?
Oh, I love how you say pearls of wisdom, mate. I don't think I've ever shared a pearl of wisdom. So yeah, the take-home messages, I obviously speak personally and the things that have benefited me. And the first thing is kind of learn your trade. Don't try and jump in kind of like just don't try and go for things that you're probably not qualified for, or qualified the right way, experienced enough for. So make sure you've got the basics right, because that will benefit you in the long run in terms of when the pressure starts mounting up, whether that's more difficult jobs, more difficult situations. If you've got those basics right, you don't have to worry about those things. You can start concentrating on the others. So definitely get the basics right, know what's right, what's wrong. That's my first thing. And I think a lot of people probably say that, mate. Like when I hear your podcasts and various other things, a lot of these ex-military guys will always say get your basics right, or the advanced paramedics like yourself, do the basics well first. It is super exciting, and you want to get to being I don't know what your goal is if you're interested in critical care, but you want to get there as quick as you can, but you have to serve your time, and it's just the way it is. It benefits you in the future. Another take-home point would be bothered. So address the small things. Don't let them expand into bigger things, and then they become even bigger things, and before you know it, you're in a total world of hurt. So be bothered. And that's simple things. You might be going, right, I'm going on a retrieval. It's an hour and a half's flight. Right, I'm going to go to the toilet. I'm not going to try and hold it in. Because before you know it, you're then concentrating on not needing the toilet, which then is detrimental to your patient and stuff. So just little things like that. And that's a pretty silly example, but it's a small thing that can develop into a bigger thing. Be honest with yourself and the team. Kind of know your weaknesses, know your strengths, work on those weaknesses. Was it a Johari's window you done, mate? That's pretty amazing actually to do, and quite insightful. Just something like that. I don't know, but be honest with yourself and your team. Get rid of the ego. There's no place for ego anywhere, because the downward spiral after being on an ego and you get caught out, it's like, oof, pretty big. And then go for it. Just keep pushing. Go and follow your goal. Don't let everyone say, "Oh, no, you can't do that." Just go for it. That is my biggest thing. And that's in the past where I've fallen down. I thought, I'm not experienced enough, or they said I shouldn't do that, and I've wasted a lot of time when I should have just went for it. So yeah, go for it. I don't even know if they're a high performing team kind of take home messages, but that's kind of what I see as.
Wayne, that's fantastic, absolutely fantastic, and it really does belie the essence of community in that concept. So just kit husbandry, doing the basics, good situation awareness, no place for ego, knowing yourself and team, the 0 point survey as well. So self, team, environment, patients, but absolutely looking after the team in that sort of homeostatic way, but whereby you can function optimally at all times. And you're right, self-care is fundamental to that as well. So looking after yourself in the whole process. But you're right as well, every day is a school day. And making sure that you are continually learning and continually on that journey. And as we spoke candidly earlier about debrief and the always debriefing, because there's always points which can be team and self revelations through actions. So that's absolutely fantastic. Wayne, I'm mindful of time, but I'm also mindful you've done an extended blog on high performing teams and your recollections of being a sniper and within critical care. So we'll put the blog posts or links to the blog posts in the show notes, because they're fantastic reading actually for more in-depth examination of these concepts. So we'll put that in the show notes. We'll also put your social media handles, because you've got some fantastic reflections from social media within the show notes as well. And it just leaves me to say thank you for your time today in sharing your recollection, Wayne.
No, thanks very much for having us, mate. It's like I say, it's always a pleasure. I always learn something from you, whether that's vocabulary or something else.
Thanks ever so much.